Exploring places. Place and space. What is the difference between place and space? Tim Cresswell says, what links a child's bedroom, an urban garden, a market town, New York City, Kosovo and the earth? One answer is that they are all spaces which people have made meaningful. They are all spaces that people are attached to in one way or another. Can photographing a place change how we feel about it? Most of us take tourist photos when we go on holiday to share and create happy memories. We can also share these memories with other people when we get back to where we live. Taking photos of where we live in our everyday lives can seem more strange. If we live there, we know what it looks like. Why would we want to photograph it? Photography can make us look again and think about where we live, trying to see with new eyes to rethink how we feel about it. Photographs can tell us a different story to the promoted version of a place. For example, the history of a place and your history of a place. Its hidden stories and how it has changed over time, and how it is still changing now, how different communities use and think about the location. Photography can be a way to share ideas and talk about a place with each other. It can enable people to map a place in a particular point of view. Representing place. Before easy access to travel, many painters would spend time in one area or location. Photography came into being at roughly the same time as the early railway systems. As trains and cars have become more accessible, people have become more mobile, perhaps lessening their want to stay in one place. How we are sold place. Adverts will sometimes use images of places to sell us a product or an idea. Hovis is an example of this. Hovis is a bread brand in the UK that was advertised by images of a boy on a bike in a Yorkshire village, fondly remembering his history. The advert played with a welcoming feeling of place, home and community. We might feel comfortable somewhere because we feel familiar with it. We have a network of friends and family there perhaps. We might feel alienated from a place because we don't feel any positive feelings towards it. We might have ended up there not out of choice. We might not feel part of the wider community of the area. As writer Abigail Solomon Godot suggests, at different times we will either be an insider or an outsider. An example of an insider would be someone who photographs things that are personal to them, or like family photography, or documenting your own community. An example of outsider photography could be tourists, anthropologists, documentary makers who take photos of things that are not their own community. Seeing the world as an outsider can be more appealing. Photographing things that are unusual to us, things that look exotic and are different from our everyday lives. Many photographers and artists find ways to look differently at their own surroundings, seeing past the mundane to show their own world in a new light. Where do we feel like we most belong? Where do we feel like outsiders? Can marginalised groups who often feel like outsiders get a sense of belonging in a place and a community? What photos are important to us when we think about where we live? Our everyday surroundings can often look uninteresting to us, but look at a picture from 100 years ago and see how it's changed. There can be a fascinating look at how the lives in the area has changed for the people who live there. Places change all the time, Economics, political factors, social upheaval, wars, disasters, all of these make places change, some faster and some slowly. City villages, a group that is marginalised, for example, through ethnicity, culture or sexuality, will often establish their own community in a wider city. Sometimes this is not noticeable, especially to the outsider, but is known to the inhabitants of the place. Sometimes a culture will make itself much more visible and celebrate its presence. These areas often start as a refuge for people that find themselves outside the main population. They often end up also becoming a tourist attraction. Cities often encourage these areas and welcome the visitors that they bring. Circa Lisa Kuntunen. Kuntunen was born in Finland and she moved to the northeast of England in the 1960s. She was here at a great time of change in the area, when communities were being moved, new estates were being built as old ones were getting knocked down. She has documented and celebrated the place and the people since first coming to the UK. She's done this with great love and affection and wonderful humour. Many photographers look to document a particular type of thing, putting together a series of something we don't usually notice or give much importance to. This can open our eyes to the little things that surround us. Michael Wolff's series, Bastard Chairs. Michael Wolff from Germany explored cities such as Tokyo and Hong Kong with his camera. His memorable images are often humorous and deeply humane, showing how people live their lives in the areas shaped by the demands of the city and the industry. His Bastard Chairs series does not show people, but instead they're improvised resting places. We are left to imagine what these people look like. Stephen Gill has made many series of different subjects of places he's lived, looking for new ways of using photography to show us another way of seeing the world. This series was made in London. Instead of showing us the front of the billboards, the part that we're supposed to see, he showed us the unnoticed and very unglamorous areas behind them. Discuss. Following on from the examples we have shown, think about ideas about how photography can tell us a story about a place. Can you think of an area you might want to start looking at, and what kind of story you might want to tell? Can you think of a typology you could start making? It could be furniture, or people, or buildings, or something else that you find around you. Exercise. Go to a part of the town or area that you live. Perhaps visit somewhere you wouldn't usually go. When you're there, try and see it as if you were an alien from outer space. Use new or different eyes. Be curious. The aim is to learn something new about where you live. How can the idea of photographing place be used with marginalised groups? It could be a starting point to get individuals and communities to reimagine where they live. It could be a way of giving people a voice about where they find themselves, to validate their viewpoint, to express their concerns, and look for a positive future. The ideas in this module relate to ideas explored in other Arts Hubs modules, especially therapeutic approaches. What is it about the place that you photograph that keeps you coming back?
Place, for me, the place I'm in, the place I live in, holds, as you can well imagine, a lot of memories. I know it so well, and unlike, I think, with taking portraits, I think with portrait photography, for me, that's about creating a future memory. Visiting landscape, the place that I live, the place I grew up, is about exploring my own memories. So time's gone by, and I get something new every time I go and I explore. But I think also, just from a sort of therapeutic angle, it's time away from what is otherwise quite busy and involved. I also think it's a thing that's just for me. I feel like a lot of the rest of the time I'm perhaps serving somebody else. You know, my job is as a parent, you know, a partner, another key family member, I suppose. Whereas I think being on my own in a landscape and spending time there with my camera is 100% me. And it's, to use a kind of modern term, it's quite a mindful thing.
Do you feel sort of like a sense of, I guess, purpose while doing it, or does it make you feel, does it really give you that sort of clarity?
There is a sense of purpose, I think, to it. I don't always realise what that is when I set out. I like reading a lot as well, quite often sort of novels and also fact books on explorers and that kind of thing, because I like that idea of adventure and seeing a place. And I think through exploring my own environment and taking photographs, I'm realising something about the place. I'm not necessarily knowing what the tree in front of me is called. I might not know what the particular fungi is on the ground, but I'm finding something out about it as I go. And I may well go home afterwards and even do a little sketch of it, or perhaps look it up in a book. So whilst that's not my intention, quite often I realise on reflection that there was a purpose to my going and doing that day. Yes, I really like these trees here. The shape that the one in front is making in particular, as it kind of curves across the front of the others. It's almost like a protective stance. See if I can get that in frame. You need to come down quite low for it. Well, that's a bit over, I've just noticed. One of the things I do quite a lot is I kind of shoot and then realise I needed to adjust something, but I think that's just because I'm thinking about what's in front of me rather than the technical stuff. But the nice thing about landscape, nothing's too fast moving, so you can adjust and reshoot. That's lovely. It's a good time of year to get detail. Nothing's too bright. We've got nice shadows on the ground as well, which is great actually. So I think my favourite weather is probably quite different to this. It's foggy, misty. It creates quite a bit of atmosphere, I think, for a shoot. And I think every time I've taken a series of images in that kind of weather, I've always got some successes. I think I'm quite confident of achieving a successful image. Whereas I think when it's like this, it's quite bright. You can get back and look at the image on a bigger screen and see, you know, perhaps too many bright spots or perhaps not as much detail. And it's not as unique, I don't think. I think fog creates a uniqueness. One of the things I do love about landscape is this need to move around a lot. So there's getting down onto the ground, quite often come back absolutely filthy. Sometimes climbing up stuff. And I do enjoy that. I think it's looking at things that people wouldn't normally look at. So not everybody goes for a walk and will lie on the floor to look at a scene. And I think you've got to, if you're a photographer, move around a bit. There we are. That's good. That's got all of those trees then in the background, all the way up to the ridge, and then we've got this kind of pathway leading up the centre from where all their mates were culled. I think one of the other things I really enjoy, so I'm going to take a picture of these leaves with the shadow in the front there, is it never looks the same. It always looks different. And it just means you can shoot the same scene and just get completely different results every time.
What sort of things have been your influence when you start making work?
I think initially, when I think back to my sort of early stages of trying to develop my photography, Faye Godwin was a big influence for me, because I think she started in a similar way, literally leaving her own front door, photographing family, having been constrained by family to some degree. But also artists like Jem Sowam. I love his kind of repetitive work. So he's revisiting a place and going over it time and time again to see how something might evolve in front of his eyes over a period of time. And of course, his work is incredibly beautiful. And his kind of ethos of making an image, not taking a photograph, has stuck with me. So I see it as a process and not just a kind of finished thing.
Do you come across any barriers in this? They could be physical or even just mental barriers when you come about setting about making work in your location.
Yeah, I mean, literal barriers, of course, are time. I think with a lot of people may understand with landscape photography, you've got to consider your light. Weather conditions do play a part, but I'm not too put off by those. I think they can add some interest, even if it's inclement. But I think the biggest one for me is definitely time, because early start, late finish doesn't always work alongside family. So that can be tricky.
So what's next for you within this project? Have you got something you're really striving towards that you want to achieve from it, or? So I'm continuing to explore my local area, and I'm trying to research and dig deeper into the sort of why of why I photograph what I photograph, and my own experience of the place that I'm in. And I'm reading literature around the subject, as well as looking at sort of the phenomenological writings from others. So, yeah, I'm just trying to explore in finer detail, really, the reasons behind why I photograph what I do, to better understand it. Cool. And then one final question for you then, Lucy. If money was no object and you could get anywhere and access to anybody, who and what or where would you photograph?
Well, if I think about one of the things that sticks in my mind over the last couple of years, a piece of work, though I never got to see it for real, was the Crystal Lebas project that she did called Regarding Forests. And that piece of work was conducted in Japan. And actually, I think that's probably where I would like to go and spend time. It would be a completely different culture to anything I've seen before, and I think would probably challenge me in a way that would be worth pursuing. Looking up at the trees and just how close they are together. And I think I'm right in thinking that the trees literally do communicate with one another, and they reach to one another for that very purpose. And that's quite fascinating to think about. I love the shape of the one just up here. It's almost lost its top and decided to branch off left. So quiet. Back to a big painting by Tassita Dean that she did of a huge tree, and that's what I'm thinking of when I'm looking at this, with the texture actually, because it was all done in kind of whites and rays. One of the things I love about lichen is, to me, it's like a whole other kind of micro world that's happening. It kind of looks like Earth does from space.
Within photography then, James, who would you deem as your large influences or people that you've taken inspiration from?
It's an odd question because, of course, lots of the people I like make photographs that I don't make. So I really like Ed Batinsky's work. I really like Joel Sternfeld's work in particular. He's amazing. And then there are others who's, I went through a period where I really liked Steve McCurry. And this is, they sort of pile on top of each other, and then you go back in time and you look at Cartier-Bresson and what he did. And so, but every now and again, I'll catch myself aping someone that I love. So I'll be looking at a photo and I go, oh, that looks like something Ron Fricker would have done for Koyaanisqatsi, or that looks like a Sternfeld. When I'm exploring spaces with a camera, it's as much as anything else, it's thinking about light and shape and reflection and shadow. It isn't, it's a departure from my other work in the sense that I'm not necessarily looking for narrative, or if I am, I'm looking for an enclosed narrative within a single picture. And that might just be like the way the shadow falls or the shapes that the light make. I don't know, trying to make the unspectacular spectacular by sort of placing it in a context where it can be viewed afresh. And that's always interesting, but and it's easier to do in a space that you don't know, because you're generating fresh. If you're seeing it for the first time, there's an opportunity to explore it. Whereas there's a temptation when you're in a space that you know well, that you just kind of rely on old memories. You don't engage with the space in the same way. I'm always intrigued when I come home from a long trip, and I've been doing a lot of photography. I come back to my hometown and I shoot it the way I shoot locations when I'm on holiday. I'm like, ooh, I love the way that does that, and I love the way that this does this, and I love the way that those things interact. And actually, it's something that I actually find it quite difficult to maintain when I'm photographing somewhere I've been lots of times. There's something very freeing about having time to just explore a space and to explore with a camera. I think there's something really interesting about almost getting in tune with what you want to photograph without having to think about it too hard. Because if you go out and just make photos with the things that you see that are interesting enough for you to photograph them without being too cerebral about it, then when you get those images back, you can look at them and go, this is what I'm interested in. I tend to be, I don't know, it sounds really, I'm not sure if this works I tend to be a visual photographer, in the sense that I tend to be arranging elements in an order or a shape for the purposes of them existing in that order and shape, if that makes sense. So it isn't necessarily about making a broader point. It's about, this is what this looked like. I could see the way the sun was falling on all this rubbish from way down there, and it's just a really interesting collection of geometric shapes and reflections. And it's just rubbish, but so in the case of this, I like the light, I like the shapes, I like the three-dimensionality of the cardboard box with a harsh sunshine. I like the fact that you've got leading lines taking you down the back. You've got an alleyway that takes you into the distance. And you've got, this kind of stark wall, which is obviously the railway line, but taken out of context, feels quite imposing. And the interaction between them. Plus, rubbish is always interesting. Or other people's rubbish is always interesting. There's always a tension when you're driving between, should I stop here or should I move on to the next space? And the problem with that is that and the tension is like, well, if I carry on driving, I might see something else, and you can't stop everywhere. On the driving tours I've done in the past, where I've been sort of driving across Europe, there's always a thing where you see like a dilapidated petrol station. You go, oh, I really want to stop, and then you've got that kind of that tension of if you're traveling with other people or traveling with family, then you're you're inconveniencing other people, and so it has to be worth stopping. And then you drive past, and you're like, oh, I wish we'd stopped because I think that would have been really interesting. When you're walking, particularly if you're walking on your own, there's still a certain amount of tension because you never know what's going on around the corner, what you might be missing whilst you're stopping to focus on something. But if you can be as free as you possibly can and just go with it and not have high expectations, just kind of feel and look, then actually you can then you can see all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't see driving. Or not only that you wouldn't see driving, but that you wouldn't stop for, but actually is an interesting image, even if it's just in terms of like light and shape. That I like to explore places I don't know, because I can view them in a way that I find it quite difficult to view spaces I know. At the same time, there's obviously an advantage to exploring places you know, because you get to know them better, and B, there's always a bit that you haven't seen before or something that's changed. Sometimes I think the challenge is just that preservation of the excitement, of the awe, where you just think, well, actually, that's awesome, we're going over there. Or actually what you want, the things you walk past every day are of interest, particularly if you take them out of context or show them in a different light. And so preserving that interest is always interesting and challenging. Come this way a bit. Oh, just because you're in the reflection. My favourite places to photograph are just my favourite places to be. I mean, I really like Rome as a city, and ever since I stopped trying to make picture postcards and started trying to photograph it almost as kind of a Rome theme park, it's been a really interesting place to people watch and explore, because you've got kind of these layers of, very modern and super old history all kind of layered one on top of the other, and just kind of, you're walking around and there's a taco joint and a amphitheatre, and they're all kind of one on top of the other, and it's all a little bit unreal in a lot of ways. So I mean, but I think anything where I feel suitably removed from home is a good place to photograph, because there's that, that excitement of photographing something new. And I'm very keen. I'm very aware that I do like the new and the novel. So I'll often be experimenting with a different film or messing around with yet another camera, because there's some, there's a newness there, and actually you can photograph a place you've been hundreds of times on a new emulsion and find new things to look at or new considerations to experiment with. So, I mean, it's always nice to photograph things as they are, and resist the temptation to kind of make it perfect. You've got this slightly kind of grandiose facade, and then you've got your little yellow traffic cone down here at the bottom. Yeah. And so if you can pop it in the bottom left-hand side, just to kind of undermine the power and the strength of the architecture. But also, it's a cool building. There's something really nice about just going with the flow and seeing what you see and making what you make. And lots of it's going to be rubbish. Some of it's going to be quite interesting. Some of it might spur you onto something else, or you might start to, again, if you're not trying to think about it too hard, you might start to see patterns emerging that make you go, oh, okay, that's interesting. I'm building up a body of work of this kind of thing. I particularly like, I really like switches. So if I'm walking around and I see an interesting switch, I'll take a photograph, and that kind of goes into the switch box. Whereas I'm also interested, I like entropic surfaces, surfaces or spaces that sort of exude the passage of time. So like an eroded wall or a rusty thing. One thing I think that's interesting is actually if you do explore new spaces with a camera and photograph the things that you're drawn to, it's actually a really good way of unlocking what you're interested in. Because sometimes the temptation to think about what you're interested in from a photography perspective can be quite hard, quite daunting, and can lead you in some quite funny ways. Because if you're doing it too consciously, then you end up leading yourself astray. Whereas actually, if you look back at the photographs that you've made when you're exploring a new space and go, okay, I'm interested in entropic textures. I'm interested in the mix of light and texture, or I'm interested in the construction of shapes through shadow. All of those things are, the fact that you don't know you're doing them doesn't mean that you're not doing them. And if you can unlock it when it comes to, if you can unlock it by practicing, then actually there's an option that you might suddenly find that you have a body of work that is walls with lichen on them. And it might not necessarily be, a groundbreaking, but it, once the work is there, you can then latch onto it and you can explore it. But you haven't had to kind of come up with the idea. It's just something you're already interested in. And hopefully there'll be legs within that project because it's something that you like automatically. I use my phone all the time. I'd say that the thing to bear in mind is that I don't know what the stats are in terms of how many photos are uploaded every hour or something like, or it's like every day there's more uploaded than were taken in the 20th century or something crazy. But the vast majority of them are taken like this or like this. And so actually, if you can just do something else, that's a really quick step to, it's a super quick step to making something that's a bit different. And so just changing a viewpoint. And, modern phone cameras are amazing. I've given up having a digital compact because my phone is so good. And I use it all the time. And the thing is, if you can see it and you can photograph it, it doesn't really matter what you're using, or at least it doesn't to the viewer. I find using older and more esoteric cameras changes the way that I photograph, and that changes the photograph. But at the same time, most of the photographs I've taken this morning could easily have been taken on my phone instead. And I wouldn't have run out of film, which is what I think I'm about to do. Yeah, try and get off the beaten path a little bit. But yeah, photograph what you see. Just pull a funny face there for the cut.